Teacher Feature is a column that engages with the work of diverse educators in India. It gives us a peek into their quirks, how they think about classroom and educating, and what they are doing differently.
I found out about Ashvattha Learning Communities through an initiative called Shikshak Chopal that they started during the pandemic. It was an online space for teachers, pre service teachers in the profession, and also retired teachers to share their ideas about education, learning, and children. It was through this space that I found out more about Arushi, since she had been interested in teacher training and creating spaces for building skills and competencies. We thought it would be interesting to talk to her about this edition's theme.
So, I looked at your education history a little bit and was curious to know how you got into this whole field of teaching, teacher education. Like, what inspired you to enter this field?
That is definitely a heavy and long question, but I'll try to keep it short. I think there are two or three factors to it. One is that between like working on teacher training and getting my engineering degree, like I worked on various developmental issues and social issues, gender, rural development, entrepreneurship. And I think one of the things that I realized was really missing was lack of access to information as well as spaces to process that information. And the second, that like I really love creating those spaces and I love learning. And I think that sort of like just helps me to be really excited about everyone else's learning. So I think that's been one factor. The other is that like my grandfather was a school teacher and headmaster in like our ancestral village, and I've grown up on his stories, like stories about him and how the work he did impacted other people, other families in the village, impacted our family. Like I wouldn't have the life that I have if he wouldn't have been so pedantic about education for the previous generation and then for my generation as well. So I think that sort of has always like, so the importance of teaching and education is something which is like very deeply inculcated in my being in that sense. And I think the third is that um, my my primary, I would say, like if I have to use the word politics, my primary politics is feminism. And I've been trying to figure out ways on where I like where can I promote that. एंड अभी मेरी जितनी समझ बनी है उसके हिसाब से मुझे लगता है एक तो जितना ज़्यादा जल्दी हो उतना अच्छा है. सो लाइक वर्किंग विद प्राइमरी स्कूल स्टूडेंट्स, एंड आई थिंक द फैक्ट दैट no system exists in isolation. And if I personally am interested that this gender hierarchy thing should not exist, but then it cannot, like, the idea of hierarchies is what needs to be dismantled, and that I believe like can be done through schooling. Now, can it actually be done through schooling? हम उसमें नहीं जाएंगे अभी. But that is sort of like the first step where we start learning these hierarchies, at least in the larger world outside of the household. Um, so I think that's all of these things combined have sort of um, inspired the word you used to do this work.
Okay, that's really interesting. And what was your idea about teaching and learning before you went into this field, and how has it changed over time?
Hmm. Hmm. Um, I think my idea of teaching and learning hasn't changed so much after I've gotten into this field. I think it evolved through my experiences before getting into this, and that's actually also like given me the hope that there are alternative ways of doing things, there are pedagogies that you can use, there are other systems which are trying out different things. So I would say that, like, when I started like Ashwath in October 2020 now. So I think I was very, very focused on the socio-emotional learning aspect of it, the mental health aspect of it, and making learning holistic. Um, but I realized that some of it was coming from my own lack of experience of being in the classroom, as well as um, limited exposure to sort of government school and affordable private school settings, and also my own educational experience. Why I say that is because personally, probably the way that the system is designed worked for someone like me. Um, but the softer aspects of it didn't work for me. So I think that's sort of like what made me feel that cognitive वाले उसमें तो सब सही है, बस बाकी चीजें problematic हैं. But I think as I've been like engaging with all of this more, I am I'm able to reflect on my own bias that's coming from my own experience, and the fact that actually even for cognitive development the system doesn't really work for most people. um, so I think that's been one major change. And even with Ashwath, initially, like, it was so much about like just student well-being, and now the focus is on how do we sort of bring well-being and learning together. And there is a sort of well-being in if students are able to enjoy learning as well. And I think the other thing that has really changed is not about teaching learning, but just the empathy with teachers. Again, I do think that I had a certain level of empathy for teachers, which is what prompted me to start this work. But really, like, I'm amazed by like the amount of things that teachers have to take care of and do. It's actually it I almost feel that it's a little unfair, the amount of expectations that society has from these individuals without providing any support and any respect. um, so we were creating this competency framework for what are the skills and attitudes that an Ashwath educator should have. And it was such a tedious process, and the list of competencies is endless. And it since then I've just been discussing with my team and my friends and everyone that tell me any other profession that has such a huge competency requirement. Any other, like the highest paid, highest respected profession anywhere in the world, will not require anyone to be skilled at so many things. um, so yeah, I think that's made me like, it's a live question that I'm living with, that like, what should be a teacher's role? Like, it feels unrealistic, the expectations that we have right now, and it feels like the system is trying to wash its hands off everything by just putting it onto these individuals, which again is like a very neoliberal idea, right? Yeah.
I think like no one really considers that if you want student well-being, you need to have teacher well-being as well. I don't think I've heard of those ideas anywhere at all.
टीचर्स एंड डॉक्टर्स तो ये तो सेंट होने चाहिए, इनको क्या किसी भी चीज की जरूरत है? ये ह्यूमंस थोड़ी हैं, अरे.
Whether there were any disparities between your ideas when you first entered, something that was very different from what you expected it to be.
In what respect? Like, I'm not sure I get the question.
As
I'll
in
be
within, yeah, within classroom settings or in terms of the roles that teachers hold, like you were talking about.
See, it's been all our work has been during COVID, so we we haven't really had too many opportunities to actually be in a classroom. Um, a lot of it has been virtual, and a lot of it has been limited to pre-service or in-service teachers. Um, yeah, so I don't know if there is much that I can say. Um,
Were there any additional roles that you think teachers had to take on because of the pandemic also? Like something that might not have been um, a role that they would normally take?
I mean, let's not even talk about the administrative and the health roles that were given to teachers during this time. But the assumption that any teacher should be able to just shift online, where does this come from? Who is thinking about it? Like, if you would, for example, if either of you would have been doing this, is there any chance that you would have just assumed that teachers will be able to do this? Like, then what do you think, like, what do these people think that like education is, teaching, learning is, and that like what is their estimation of teachers' ability as well as availability of resources and time? Um, yeah, so I think just doing everything online, I would say that's a big responsibility and it's a big drain. Even for us, like when we are working with pre service teachers, it's so tiring to work online. There are benefits, of course, like we can have this conversation, we got connected, all of these are good things. But the amount of effort that has to go into every session, I think it's threefold probably. Yeah.
Okay, so I was wondering if you have any story or any anecdotes that you remember distinctly and would like to share with us. Any eye-opening moment related to teaching and learning or just observing the practice of teaching itself.
Hmm. So, a couple of months back, we started an after school learning center in our neighborhood. And so it's my own personal story, it's not some other teacher's story. Um, and so we have a group of 10 to 15 students, mostly 6 to 10 years old. And before that, this journey of building empathy towards teacher is a constant process. So everything that I'm doing, I'm also thinking about, like how would teachers be processing it with who are in the system or who are working in a classroom. Was simple, the content was simple, like that. It's not about that, but just the joy of being with the students and the connection that they were experiencing and I was experiencing and other people in my team were experiencing, right? We were having these instances where every day we would share that, like, I dreamt of these kids, I dreamt of these kids, or I was thinking about this. And while we were experiencing this connection, I also started to sort of have to come to terms with the fact that we have only this much influence in these children's life. So I can care for them as much as I want to. But ultimately, given my own life, my own limitations, the limitations of system, the multiple factors that are going to affect their own life, affect these children's life, there's only so much I can do. Now, what that means is that I have to be okay to love and care and know that still that is not enough. um and I think while that's a great motivating force for action, it sort of made me feel that teachers working in difficult contexts and having difficult contexts themselves, like if they were to if every teacher were to remain really open to the innocence that children bring in, and to be open to connecting to children at a deeper level, it would require so much of them emotionally to be able to deal with the literally the existential pain of this world, because now it's not just about me or my friends and my family, but it's also about all of these other people who or and children at that, like who I'm deeply attached to and care about, but know that like this is how life is, this is how world is, so also have to sort of accept that. And which made me think that probably probably it's a defense mechanism for a lot of adults when they work with children to actually not build those relationships and become closed and like just use authority. Of course it's also conditioning and lack of sort of training and all of those things, but that's sort of like what I took away from that experience, that maybe there's like so many reasons for why teachers behave and show up in the way they do in a classroom setting. um, and being with children is a deeply emotional experience for any human adult. Like that is what we are wired for biologically. um, so the fact that that doesn't actually translate and happen in every classroom is, yeah, it's something to really think about. I don't know if this is the kind of story you were looking for. All my stories are going to be like about just understanding teachers, especially right now in COVID when we get to talk to them so little that we just have to hypothesize.
No, I don't think we had a particular idea when we were talking to you. Like, we just wanted to know what you think about it. But I think that always works because there are just so many different ideas that everyone has about what a teacher is, right? So, I mean, it's a lot to think about, even with what you said. I did want to ask, so like because you have worked on gender and education, how has that been brought out into classroom settings, if it has in any ways? Like a lot of the things that I see online talking about gender and education, they're in a very Western context, I think. I haven't seen a lot of resources like more localized to India. So I was wondering about how that has played out in any classrooms you've observed or any teachers who you've worked with.
Hmm. Again, I would say that we haven't really gotten a chance to observe too many classrooms in this time. Um, with respect to teachers, you're right. Like there is very little happening in the Indian context when it comes to gender and education, and like that's something that we'll also explicitly start including in our work in a while. Um, but a couple of things that I have realized over this time: one, the number of responsibilities that female teachers have is just mind boggling. Like, and if like majority of our teacher workforce right now is female, then what is the system doing to sort of accommodate their needs? So I remember there was this couple of months back, there was this comment by the Rajasthan education minister saying that wherever there are more female teachers in a school, there are more problems, and either them or the administration needs added on, something of that accord. And again, the fact that I'm not even questioning his observation. Maybe that is, let's say that that is what the data says. But then, can we actually look at the data and think about that? Why might that be the case? Like, instead of just assuming that it's the female teacher's problem, but like, what are the number of responsibilities that they are juggling? Um, and I think even when we look at teacher training and the amount of time and effort that we want teachers to put into their classroom, I think a lot of times this is not taken into account. That how many hours does an average Indian woman get outside of her work life for her work? So when are they supposed to do all of it? Again, it doesn't, like, I'm not trying to say that teachers are absolved of all responsibilities and blame. We have all kinds of people, but I think it's something which is not really considered while designing programs. Um, and that if women don't actually have agency in their everyday life, like overall life, then most of them will not be able to model any agency in the classroom as well. And then that means that, like, children will not have role models for agency. Then what kind of a society are we building? um, I mean, yeah, I think these are things that I've been thinking about with respect to gender and education, and like how the feminization of the profession has changed um, what the profession is. Even, like, in fact, I think there are research studies which talk about the fact that across the world, since there's been a higher influx of females in the profession, the social respect for the profession has gone down. And it is very twisted. It's just, that's where I would leave.
I think I also heard a similar thing somewhere. I think my sister read it in some article that um, because a lot of females are in this profession, the pay grade of teachers is less. Teachers are paid less just because there are more females in this profession. So,
That's actually the reality in the US as well. Um, that's that one of the reasons why they are paid so less. Because I think, in terms of a public school teacher's compensation, India would probably fare better than the US. Or Batay, any other questions coming to your mind?
Not immediately. I don't think I thought about how like the role of a teacher would be sociologically bound as well in terms of identity and gender. I don't think I thought about it that way. I think I've always thought of it as a blanket teacher.
Yeah, and in fact, so this thing about, like, feminization of profession is something that I'm, like, I think I got exposed to like 2 years back. But recently, 2 weeks back, I was having a conversation with some team members, and we realized that gender is only one of the identities. Um, if we think about our country, um, teaching would be a very quote unquote upper caste profession. And I wonder, I don't know, I haven't read anything on it, but I wonder how people's perception of a teacher and like the social respect given to teachers has also changed as the caste distribution has changed.